I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister and her name's Ashley. And we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking. And my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, "You need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night." And I look at him and I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night." Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, No. He's like, "No, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her." So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, we don't go into each other's rooms, do we? And we agreed that we do not. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep.
This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, you know what, we'll go back to our house anyways. As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees, for a split second, the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months.
Back in the Victorian era, when a family lost a child, they would make what was called a mourning doll. This was mainly for very rich families, and they would make a mourning doll to look exactly like the child that they lost. It would often be made of wax, and sometimes the hair would be taken straight from the dead body and put onto the doll to add an extra level of authenticity. Then the dolls would be put into the real crib of the child they lost. Their clothes would be changed every single day. They would be cared for like a real child to help the family cope with the loss. Back in that time, medicine was significantly less advanced, and the mortality rate for children and infants was a lot higher than it is now. A lot of kids died very young back then, so mourning dolls were a very popular thing.
Have you ever met someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? That's what happened to Jillian, but things took a strange and unexpected turn. Jillian always went to this one cafe, and one day she bumped into a young man. His name was Charles. Charles came from a wealthy family and thought that no woman could ever say no to him. He asked Jillian to have coffee with him, and she did. They had a friendly conversation for a while, but by the time the cafe was about to close, Charles gently grabbed Jillian by the hand and asked her out. She said, "I'm sorry, you're just not my type," and left. This made Charles furious. From then on, he'd come to the same cafe every single day to hope that Jillian was there. It got to the point where Jillian would look through the window and see Charles waiting for her. She'd feel uncomfortable and leave. It just seemed like he wouldn't take no for an answer. But things were not so simple. One day, it was the final straw. Charles brought flowers to the cafe and waited for Jillian. When she didn't show up, Charles took the flowers, threw them on the ground, and stomped on them. He yelled, "That's it, I'm gonna make you my girlfriend if it's the last thing I do." The next day, he looked up Jillian's address in the phone book and went to her house, but he could never have expected what he would find there. Follow for part 2. Have you ever met someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? Charles became obsessed with Jillian after she blew him off at the cafe. Charles was the type of man who couldn't accept that anyone might reject him, so he found Jillian's address from the phone book and went to her house. He knocked on the door many times until he heard Jillian's voice say, "Charles, what the heck are you doing?" Charles replied, "I don't get why you wouldn't go out with me. We had such a great conversation in the cafe." Jillian replied, "I already told you, you're just not my type. But if you really want to know what my type is, I can show you." Then she opened the door. Charles stepped in. "You see that door at the end of the hallway? Go in there and you'll see the type of man I like." Charles eagerly went in and saw a staircase leading down to the basement. What happened next would shock anyone. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he smelled a horrible rotting smell. Then he saw that he was surrounded by 12 or 13 bodies nailed to the wall. All of them were headless. On the table against the wall, their heads were arranged in a row. Suddenly, Charles felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw Jillian with an axe. Jillian swung the axe, and as Charles's head flew across the room, Jillian picked it up, looked it dead in the eye, and said, "Now you're my type."
Have you guys ever heard of the sad origins of the yellow smiley face? Now, this is obviously a popular symbol worldwide, and the oldest artifact found with the smiley face on it was a picture dating to 1700 BC, but the classic form of a smiley face was invented in 1963. There was this insurance company back in the 60s that hired a graphic designer. They wanted him to create an image that would make their workplace seem more cheery. So the man literally sat down and drew a simple smiley face on a yellow background. Now, the company loved the design and ended up only paying him $45 for it. This designer did not know that it was about to become a worldwide symbol. The image quickly gained popularity, and over time, many legal battles ensued over who truly claimed ownership over this legendary design. At one time, even Walmart got involved, and it's so sad because the man who actually made this smiley face was never truly credited. His name was Harvey Ross Ball, and he was only paid $45.
Do you style your hair the same way every day? Well, there's an urban legend about a woman who always wore her hair in a bun, but for her, this habit would lead to something terrifying. This woman loved wearing her hair in a bun, but she might have taken it a bit too far. She didn't want to style her hair differently or even take out her bun to clean her hair. Whenever she took a shower, she would just wear a shower cap to make sure the water didn't mess up her bun. At night, she would sleep with a towel around her hair so the bun didn't move. After a while, she had to put hairspray in it to mask the smell. Then her scalp started feeling itchy, so she would put more hairspray in it. Even when the itching got intense, she just applied more hairspray. But her husband finally found out about how bad the situation had gotten when he woke up one day and his wife was still asleep. He tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't move. She had died in the middle of the night. The husband called the police, fearing that something unusual might have happened. But when her body was examined, they finally took out her bun. Inside her hair, they found something terrifying. They found a huge spider had gotten into her hair, made a nest, and laid eggs. When the baby spiders hatched, they bit through her skull and ate her brain. This is why you should always pay attention to details. A woman was brushing her hair when she found a little bump at the back of her head, so she called her husband to have him check it out for her. He said it looks like a button. It's small, round, hairless, and flat at the top. He joked around it with her, asking, "What do you think would happen if I pressed it?" Then he did, and the woman instantly leaned up and gave him a kiss. Then the husband kept pressing it as a joke, but something went wrong. It seemed like he pressed it all too many times, and a cool numbness spread down the woman's neck, around her arms and her legs. Her eyes automatically shut and her vision went black. A while later, the woman woke up and learned that she had fainted. The husband kept apologizing with tears in his eyes as if it was all his fault. Eventually, they both went about their lives and tried to forget about this incident, but the woman just couldn't, because afterwards, she came across a photo of her family in the living room. It was a photo of her and her husband's wedding propped up on a ceramic urn. She looked closer at the photo of her own face. She's smiling as if she's the happiest girl in the world, but there's a small scar under her left eyebrow, a scar that she now didn't have.
Warning, this is why you should not touch an old house. A woman recently bought an old house in a very remote area. She wanted to renovate the home, and very quickly she began tearing down the kitchen and ripping all the old wallpaper off. She claimed the wallpaper was extremely satisfying to rip off, like scabs of a sunburn. Very quickly she noticed names and dates in places she was removing the wallpaper. One night she was curious and spent hours googling one of the names. She discovered they were missing people, and the dates they went missing matched what was written on the wall. She called the police, and when they arrived they said, "Yep, it's human. What you were removing from the walls was not wallpaper."
Did you know that there's actually a haunted Ronald McDonald bench in Mexico? This is actually one of the most bizarre stories that I've ever heard. The story goes that two young men had just left the nightclub and were very hungry and went looking for a late night snack. They both settled on having McDonald's, and once they had gotten their food, they both took a seat on the Ronald McDonald bench outside of the restaurant. It was a strange bench because it had a statue of Ronald McDonald sitting in the middle with his arms spread out. His face almost had this crazed expression, and one of the men eventually laid down on Ronald's lap and said, "I'm tired." Just then, Ronald McDonald's head turned and looked down at him and said,
"I'm tired too."
The legend says they were so shocked by hearing this that one of them died instantly and the other is still in a coma to this day. Apparently, the security cameras outside the restaurant recorded everything. So it is rumored that McDonald's paid a huge amount of money to cover it up, because they didn't want the public to find out they had an actual really dangerous haunted McDonald's statue.
These are what your dreams say about you and your life. If you ever dream that you're falling, it means that something in your life isn't going well. It suggests that you may need to rethink a choice in your life or consider a new direction in some area of your life. If you ever have a dream that you're being chased by something or someone, it suggests that you're trying to avoid something daily in your life. It also suggests that you're trying to forget something that makes you feel angry, sad, or any other type of emotion. If you've ever had a dream about losing your teeth, it indicates you're concerned about your ability to communicate or doing something embarrassing in public.
This was one of the creepiest Barbie dolls that was ever sold in stores. This was called the Barbie Video Girl doll that came out in 2010. She came with a real working camera disguised as her necklace, and a video was projected onto her back. The issue here is that it could record up to 30 minutes of video, and even the FBI became worried about what this children's toy could be used for. People were concerned that this video Barbie was always watching. Then there was another doll called Hello Barbie, and she, on the other hand, was always listening and was happy to record your conversations and send that data via Wi-Fi to Mattel. So these two Barbies really freaked out parents because it really seemed like an invasion of their privacy.
Crazy part is, most people believe that these three things will actually save your life. They don't. Let's pretend you get stuck in a blizzard on a mountain, and you need to stay warm. So how are you going to do that? You remember hearing somewhere that alcohol is supposed to keep you warm. So you whip out your flask, you take a swig, and sure enough, you feel warm already. You feel flush in the face. But it's an illusion because what happens is alcohol, it increases blood flow to the skin and away from your core. So it plummets your core temperature, increasing the odds that you'll get hypothermia and die. So you stop drinking booze and you head off for a cave you see in the distance. Once you get inside the cave, you remember that you know how to make a fire. And so you do. Except the problem with fires inside of caves is it starts to expand the rock above you, causing it to crack and eventually caving in on you. So you narrowly escape the cave-in, only to hear something in the background. A grizzly bear was in the cave with you, and now it's charging out to avoid the cave-in. But you remember, humans can outrun bears, and you start taking off thinking, dumb bear, and it just catches you.
This was a banned episode of Peppa Pig. This episode was called Mr. Skinny Legs, and it came out in 2004. And depending on where you live, it was taken off the air immediately. This episode was supposed to teach its young viewers that while spiders may look scary, they can't really hurt you. At the beginning, Peppa is afraid of the spider, but by the end of the episode, she befriends the spider and invites him as a guest to her tea party. Now, I think the moral of this story is pretty great, but apparently people in Australia did not agree. Australia is home to some of the most venomous spiders in the world, like the redback spider, whose bites are intensely painful and have historically been linked with deaths. So this episode was unfortunately banned in Australia because they did not want kids trying to befriend spiders. People used to cover their mirrors after someone died. Back in the Victorian era, after someone died, they would immediately go to their house and cover their mirrors with black cloths. This is because they believed that if they walked past the mirror and saw their deceased loved one looking back at them, it meant they would die next. They also thought the spirit would be forever trapped inside the mirror and would never be able to find peace. There were also just a lot of superstitions around mirrors back in that time. People thought that spirits could come through them. People thought mirrors brought bad luck. People thought that if you looked at yourself in the mirror, you would find the secret truth about yourself. But yeah, there are a lot of very creepy vintage photos of people covering their mirrors with black blankets or cloths. Here are the most bizarre things that have ever happened at Disney World. There was a time where a couple tried to smuggle a baby onto Space Mountain. A couple was in line to ride Space Mountain when their duffel bag started to make noise, and the couple refused to open it. So the cast member called security, and when they opened the bag, they saw a 6-month baby inside of it. The baby was okay, but my goodness. People try to spread their loved one's ashes in the Haunted Mansion. This actually happens way too often, and cast members have to try and stop it as much as they can. It causes the ride to shut down temporarily for an emergency ash cleanup. A husband made a very bizarre announcement at Cinderella's castle. The family of 4 came in for dinner, and about halfway through, the husband politely stands up and he announced that his wife of 15 years had been cheating on him. Wow. In 2007, Tigger punched a teenager in the face. Apparently the boy was messing with Tigger's costume and Tigger wanted him to stop and he didn't, and then punched him in the face. Here are some more very scary things that happened at Disney World. There was this man who came to the park and he was called the Balloon Cutter. He was a man with a pair of scissors that would go up behind little girls holding Mickey Mouse balloons, and he would cut the string, releasing their balloons into the air. And before he was caught, he ran off into the crowd. How horrible. And there was this one time where Dumbo was in a parade. It was a really hot day and he felt extremely sick in his costume. So he threw up in his mask head and it came out all over him. Next, we have an employee that came face to face with a panther. Apparently, this employee was working a shift at 3 a.m. a.m. He came face to face with this panther. He backed away and luckily locked himself in a building. And lastly, the saddest one is the death of Pluto. A 38-year-old cast member was killed at Magic Kingdom in 2004 during the Share a Dream Come True parade. The employee who was dressed as Pluto was run over by the Beauty and the Beast parade float. It was extremely tragic, and now Disney is actually more strict about how the parade goes and their staff's safety.
Crazy part is, most people believe that these 3 things will actually save your life. They don't. Let's pretend you're lost in the desert and you need water and you don't have any. So where are some places you can get water? One commonly held terrible piece of advice is to drink your own pee, because it's mostly made up of water, except there's 5% of that that's all made up of just waste from your body, and even though the urine might keep you alive a little bit longer, you'll ultimately die of kidney failure. So you don't drink your own pee. Instead, you head over to some cactus you see nearby because you remember reading or hearing in school that you can drink the water inside of cactus. Except, unless it's one really specific kind of cactus, you'll be drinking lots of alkaloids and chemicals that will make you viciously ill, and you'll start vomiting and you'll have diarrhea and you'll die from dehydration much faster. So as you're sitting there wondering what you're going to do next, a venomous snake bites you. And so you instinctively start sucking on the bite to remove the poison, but you can't because it goes right in your bloodstream, and all you'll do is die much faster from infection. This is why you should always breathe through your nose. In 2009, a Russian man named Artyom Sidorkin started experiencing intense chest pains to the point where he couldn't even stand up. He tried to ignore it, but when he started coughing up blood, he went to the emergency room. They gave him an x-ray, and it revealed a fist-sized tumor growing in his lung. Afterwards, the doctor told Mr. Sidorkin, unfortunately, it looks like cancer. But before they could start removing large chunks of his lung, the doctor needed to do a biopsy to see if it really was cancer. So a terrified Mr. Sidorkin came in a few days later. They performed the biopsy, and the surgeon, as he was looking at the tissue, noticed something. Tucked in the middle of the tissue was a 5-centimeter long fir tree. Mr. Sidorkin was a botanist, and he was a big mouth breather, and at some point while he was working, he managed to inhale a fir tree seed. The doctors told him he didn't have cancer, he had a tree. He was shocked, and he said, "I had no sense that a tree was growing in my lungs." But more than shocked, he was just happy to be cancer-free.
This is why you should always lock your front doors. A kid living with both of his parents decided to watch a movie for their family weekly movie night. He then gets up to use the restroom. As he is in the restroom, he sees all of the power in the house cuts off, and then he hears 2 loud thumps. He locks the bathroom door and hears heavy objects being dragged across the hallway. The kid, freaking out, runs out of the bathroom and runs into the restroom. Once he is inside the room, he locks the door. As he locks the door, he jumps in bed and acts like he's asleep and hopes that this person who is in the house will ignore a child sleeping. He closes his eyes and hears the door creak at the same time. He squints his eyes and sees a man with no eyes dragging the bodies of both of his parents. The man dragging his parents sits his mom's dead body in a chair facing him, and then sets the dad's body on the floor facing up. It was almost like whoever was in the house who killed them wanted him to see it. He then sees the man writing something on the wall and then climbs under his bed. He laid there for hours knowing that if he moved a muscle, he would end up just like his parents. He finally built up enough courage to read the wall, and the writing on the wall said, "This is why you should always check your back seat." A woman coming home from work decided to drive home. As she's driving, she notices a black car following behind her. And every red light she stops at, this black car will constantly flicker his lights. She began to panic and drove faster and faster, taking every turn she could to get away from this car. As she's driving, she calls her dad and tells her that this car is following her and to meet her in the driveway so she's not alone. She pulled into the driveway and sees her dad waiting outside. Then she sees the car that's been following her pull in right behind her. The man in the black car behind her gets out of his vehicle and runs to her and says, "Get out of your car now." She gets out and the man behind her says, "There is somebody trying to kill you." The man in the black car behind her pulls out a weapon. He shows the woman that there has been a man in her back seat, and every time he would flash his lights, it was because the man was about to stab her.
If you ever see a random staircase in the woods, you have to get away as fast as you can. Never climb them. There was a story going around a couple years ago stating that there are abandoned staircases in national forests around the world, like deep, deep in the forest away from anybody. It's just a staircase, no other structure attached to it. Some stairs are in ruins, some are perfectly sturdy, some are iron spirals like the kind you'd find in a lighthouse, and they literally just reach up to nowhere. And there are so many different theories as to why these stairs are there and what actually happens when you climb them. Only a few few have ever dared to climb the staircases, and the people who have report feeling unnerved and unwelcome or even nauseous when they're up on the stairs. Some people say the stairs lead to another dimension, other people say it leads to hell. Others say that's why so many people and kids go missing in national forests, because they climb these stairs and they're never seen again.
This is why you should never play hide and seek. A mom decided to play hide and seek with her 2 kids. The mom began counting, ready or not, here I come. She begins searching the downstairs kitchen because she knows that they hide there every single time. As she's walking to the kitchen, she starts saying, I wonder where they are. She looks under the table and sees they aren't there, which is kind of odd. She knew they were too scared to go into the basement alone, but she decided to check anyway. They weren't there either. She began to panic. The mom then says, Jordan, Casey, come out now, mommy's not playing anymore. There was no answer. Panic really begins to set in. She decides to call 911 and reaches an operator. She tells the operator what's wrong and the operator sends an officer to her house. Once the officer arrives, he says, don't worry, we will find them. As she's sitting in the living room, she hears giggling and laughing and hears a closet door slam upstairs. She sprints upstairs and says, Jordan, Casey, you worried me sick. She opened the closet door and nobody was there. While all of this is going on, she hears the doorbell ring. She runs downstairs and finds the officer holding Jordan and Casey. The officer says, they were hiding in the shed out back. Then Jordan looks at mommy and says, why were you telling us to stay in the shed?
Storytime about how my sister sold my nudes. Yes, my own sister. So a little background information, I was in 12th grade and I was pretty popular. And my sister, on the other hand, she was in 9th grade. I'm not even saying this to boost my ego, but she was jealous of me and everybody could tell. Mainly because of the fact that she didn't have her high school glow up, she low-key still looked like a 6th grader. And there were very few guys who gave her attention, and some of the guys would even tell her that I was hotter than her. So that did not help the situation at all. Not like I even paid attention to any of these guys because I had a boyfriend. And my sister and I still shared a room even though our brothers got their own rooms. So she could literally go through my shit anytime she wanted. Well, since we shared a room and I'd never thought that she would sell my nudes, sometimes I would take these exposing pictures of myself while she was in the room. Well, she had this one friend named Jessica who also was weirdly obsessed with me. One night she was saying how funny it would be to sell someone's nudes. Like part 2 about how my sister sold my nudes. So like I said, my sister had this friend, and the one night they were talking about how funny it would be to sell somebody's pics. We all laughed, joked about it, the conversation was over and done with. I thought that was it. Like, in all honesty, I thought it was one of those things where you guys make plans to do something, and then after the conversation, you never talk about it again, and you never actually do what you said you were going to do because it was so out of pocket. So my sister's friend slept over that night, and I woke up, went to school earlier because I have volunteer work to do, so my sister usually just takes the bus. Well, I accidentally left my computer at school, so I called my sister, asked her if she could grab it and bring it into school. Now, my computer is connected to my phone. Well, I guess they decided to be little creeps, and they went on my computer and they found my pictures, and they sent them to themselves. And since my phone and computer are hooked up, I was able to see that they sent the pictures to themselves. So I started blowing up her phone, but by first period, I had a bunch of people telling me that they were about to buy my pictures. My sister literally made an ad and put it on Snapchat. My boyfriend broke. Storytime about why my sister is probably worse than yours. So a little background information, my sister and I were both 16 and in our sophomore year of high school. And yes, my sister and I were twins, but we were the complete opposite. She was a girly girl and I was a tomboy. But the summer before our sophomore year, we both got grounded because we were driving my dad's car without our license and we wrecked it. So we ended up spending all summer together, which was very unusual because it was like her and I were acquaintances living in the same house. Well, over that summer, we got super close and she ended up turning me into a girly girl. She taught me how to take care of my skin, do my hair, do my makeup, and how to dress. Now, mind you, once we got into high school, she never spoke to me because I wasn't a part of the little clique that she was in. So she was like, yay, you can finally hang out with my friends and I'm super excited. So school starts, I end up becoming friends with all of her friends, and my sister's really good friends with this one boy. But she had always said that she never liked him like that. So she introduced us, him and I started talking, and we both ended up liking each other. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why my sister is probably worse than yours. So like I said, my sister and I start school, I become friends with her friends, and she introduces me to this guy that she's been best friends with for a while. Him and I end up talking, I really like him, he really likes me, and my sister would always hype me up. She would be like, oh my god, you should get with him, such a nice guy, you guys would look so great together. So the one night he asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him, and of course I said yes, so I ran to my sister's room, I was so excited to tell her. So I knock on her door, I go in, and I'm like, oh my gosh, guess what? She's like, what? I'm like, he asked me out on a date, and she just sits there and stares at me. And when I ask her what's wrong, she's like, oh my god, you knew that I liked him, you're such a bad sister, I would have never done this to you. So then I started to feel bad, but then I didn't because I remembered how she used to hype me up. So the next day, a few hours before my date, she comes in my room. She's like, hey, I'm really sorry about how I acted yesterday. I would love to help you get ready for your date if you'll let me. I feel so bad. And we're sisters, so of course I get over it, and I tell her yes, I want her to help me, like for part 3. Part 3 about why my sister is probably worse than yours. So like I said, she asked me if I want help getting ready. I say yes. And my family's super Italian, so we have thick dark hair that grows in everywhere. Like I literally have a unibrow, and the peach fuzz that's above my lips looks like a mustache. So my sister's like, hey, do you want me to wax your face? And I say yes. And she definitely wasn't over the situation, and she wanted me to be in pain because I begged her to use this IPL device on me called U-Like, which was basically at-home laser hair removal but safer, and it did not hurt at all. So my sister hasn't had to deal with hair in literally months. So I beg her to use U-Like on me, and she's like, no, either you can let me wax you or you're going on this date with a mustache. So of course I gave in to her waxing my face. We go grab my mom's wax, which has probably been sitting in her cupboard for literally 6 years. My sister puts it in the microwave, and then I lay down on the kitchen table, and she goes to put the wax on me. I already knew this was going to be painful. As soon as the wax touched my skin, I literally started screaming, and she was like, stop being a baby, and she put more on me. I knock the container over, it gets all over me. When I get to the hospital, I figure out that I have 3rd-degree burns, and my sister did it on purpose. Story time. I'm in a long distance relationship with this boy, and I don't know if I should break up with him or not. So like I said, he says he always thinks about unaliving himself, so obviously I feel bad for him, and I just love him so much that I can't let him go, and he has a bunch of other red flags. Like, he'll tell people he's 13 and other people he's 14, and, you know, he apparently didn't know his birthday. Well, fast forward, he's been texting me more, and when I told him I loved him, he left me on open, which he never does. He always says it back to me. We still haven't really been talking on the phone, but I did send him pictures. Not fully nude, but both times I sent those, he literally called me right after. But other than that, he will never call me. Story time. I'm in a long distance relationship, and I don't know if I should break up with this boy or not. So a little background information, him and I were best friends for almost a month before we started dating, and literally as soon as we started dating, he started asking me for nudes. And I would be like, no, not tonight, I'm tired, and then he would keep asking me why, and then he would start to make me feel guilty about not wanting to send him nudes. Eventually he would just say, it's fine, I'll just wait until we can do physical things together. And he still has, quote, his hoes on Snapchat, and he still has all of their nudes and everything. And literally the day before we started dating, he told me that he liked this one girl, and he'll always hang up the phone to talk to her instead of me. And then when I bring it up, he tries to say that So obviously I try and bring this up to him, and he tries to make me feel bad by saying that he thinks about unaliving himself. He also has a few other red flags, like for part 2. Part 3 about why you should stay away from guys who had just gotten out of a long-term relationship. Like I said, I posted some TikToks of Robert and I, and Lucy's best friend Ellie decided to comment. Ellie commented something along the lines of, look at Robert finally getting some attention. And Lucy, which is his ex-girlfriend, commented, he can finally leave me alone now. So I screenshotted it and I showed it to Robert, and he was like, oh, just forget about it, it was nothing, block them. But instead of that, I decided to be petty and I posted another TikTok saying, look at Robert finally getting some attention. 5 minutes later, Ellie Snapchatted me and she was like, I don't know why you're doing that, like I just commented that because he was literally just texting Lucy on Christmas, saying that he misses her and he would do anything to get back together with her. So I screenshot it and I show it to Robert, and he doesn't say anything. He literally just straight up ignores me. So obviously we broke up. He got a new girlfriend and she would literally call me every name under the sun. So I gave her a little reminder that he's never going to get over Lucy. And I started dating Robert's best friend, and he is so loyal and I love him so much.